My name is Ruth Kaplan, and the Christmas I stopped being needed started with a missing chair of all things. Not a dramatic fight. Not a slammed door. Just a chair that used to be mine, folded and put away like it was extra clutter. It was December 24th, 5 years after my husband David died, and I was standing in my kitchen with 2 dogs staring up at me like I'd promised them something. Benny, my old beagle mix, wagged his tail like Christmas was still happening. Daisy, my little terrier with the serious eyes, pressed her head against my shin as if she could keep me upright. On the counter sat the same green ceramic platter I'd used for decades. The one David always called the turkey throne, even when we served ham. And beside it was my phone, lighting up with a notification that wasn't meant for me. A group text preview popped onto the screen. It was from my daughter Ellen. "Okay, everyone, Christmas at Mark's this year. Noon. Mom said she's probably staying home with the dogs, so no pressure." There were little heart emojis underneath. Like kindness could be typed. I stood there in my own kitchen, in my own house, looking at the life I'd built like it belonged to somebody else now. Before I tell you what I did next and why it changed my family forever, please like, share, and subscribe. Stories like this aren't just entertainment. Sometimes they're permission. And if you've ever felt yourself becoming an optional person in your own family, you're going to understand every step I took. 5 years ago, David died on a Wednesday in April. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a hospital full of machines. He died the way men like him sometimes do, quietly, stubbornly, like he didn't want to make a fuss. He'd been tired for months, dismissing it as age and work and nothing. Then one afternoon he sat down in his favorite chair, asked me if I wanted Chinese food, and never stood back up. 1 minute I was complaining about the recycling. The next minute I was pressing my hands to his chest and begging him to breathe like I could negotiate with reality. After the funeral, people brought casseroles and said things like, "He's in a better place," which always sounded to me like they were trying to relocate my grief to somewhere more convenient. What I remember most is how quickly the world returned to normal. The mail still came. The lawn still needed mowing. The bills still arrived with their crisp little due dates, as if death was not an acceptable excuse for lateness. And my 5 children showed up in waves. At first, they were everywhere. They slept on couches, made coffee, argued softly about who was driving home first. They hugged me like I might break. They told me they loved me, and they did. I don't want you to misunderstand me. My children aren't monsters. They're ordinary. Successful enough to be comfortable, busy enough to be selfish without meaning to be. And over time, that ordinary selfishness became the story of my life. Their names are Ellen, my eldest, organized, polished, the kind of woman who keeps a shared family calendar and believes that makes her generous. Mark is next, charming, big ideas, always one opportunity away from being set. He's the one who talks about money like it's oxygen. Then comes Julia, soft-spoken, married to a quiet man named Tom. 2 kids who always seem to be growing faster than my heart could keep up. After her is Nathan, single, steady, the one I worried about because he worked too much and smiled too little. And the youngest is Rebecca, my surprise baby, my bright storm. She's the one who calls me mama when she wants something. All 5 of them did well. Not extravagant wealth, not yachts and penthouses. But college paid for. Mortgages manageable. Vacations taken. Cars that start on the first turn. The comfortable middle-class success David and I worked our whole lives to give them. David was a practical man. He believed in insurance. He believed in retirement accounts. He believed that if you were careful, you could protect the people you loved from the worst parts of life. So when he died, I didn't lose everything. I had the house, our house, the one with the maple tree out front and the squeaky stair that always betrayed whoever tried to sneak upstairs. I had savings. Investments. A small inheritance from David's parents that we'd never touched. Not because we couldn't, but because we told ourselves it was for the kids someday. And that's when the trouble started. Not immediately. Not with a dramatic demand. But like water wearing down stone, year by year, my children began to treat my life like something that needed to be managed until they could collect it. At first, it was just concern. Mom, are you okay driving at night? Mom, do you really need that much house? Mom, we worry about you being alone. And I understood. I did. I was 63 and newly widowed. My hair turned gray faster than it had any right to. I cried in the grocery store because I walked past David's favorite cereal. I left his toothbrush by the sink for months because putting it away felt like erasing him. The dogs helped. We got Benny first, a year before David died, because he'd insisted we needed one more reason to go on walks. Then after the funeral, Ellen brought Daisy to me like a peace offering. She was going to the shelter, Ellen said, handing me a tiny trembling terrier with a pink collar. I thought, you might like the company. I loved them both immediately. Not just because they were sweet, but because they didn't ask me to be strong. They didn't ask me to be cheerful. They didn't treat my grief like an inconvenience. They just stayed. For a while my children stayed too. For a while the phone rang. For a while Christmas still felt like something I hosted rather than something I survived. In the first year after David died, my children were everywhere. They filled the house, hugged me too tightly, and told me I was strong as if strength was my new job title. That first Christmas I hosted because I didn't know what else to do. I cooked too much and laughed too hard and went to bed afterward feeling like I'd been holding my breath all day. The second year the visits came in pieces. Someone left early. Someone arrived late. Someone forgot to call until days after. By the third year Ellen started saying words like rotate and easier. Mark started talking about the house like it was a line item. Rebecca started texting instead of coming. Nathan started swinging by instead of staying. Julia still tried, but she was buried in work and kids. Nothing was openly cruel. It was something worse, a slow drift that made me feel like a fond obligation. I didn't begrudge them. They had lives. They were doing well, comfortable, middle-class lives David and I had worked for. But my role quietly changed from mother to background, from anchor to afterthought. And I kept making it easy. I kept keeping the lights on. I picked up the phone and stared at the screen. Ellen's message had already been followed by replies. Julia, okay, I'll bring the salad and rolls. Rebecca, yay! Can't wait, tell Mom I love her. Nathan, I can swing by her place later with gifts. Mark, perfect. Also, we should talk about the house stuff soon. House stuff. There it was, tucked at the end like an afterthought. My throat tightened. Not from the Christmas exclusion, not even from the casual assumption that I'd stay home like a leftover decoration. From the fact that Mark felt comfortable saying house stuff in the same breath as Christmas. As if my life and my property were one bundled item. Benny barked at the window, chasing a squirrel that had no idea it was part of my spiral. I set the phone down gently, like it might explode. Then I did something I hadn't done since David died. I opened the drawer where I kept the important things. Not the junk drawer. The other one. The one with the envelope of passwords, the safe deposit key, the original deed to the house. The one David used to call the grown-up drawer. Inside was a manila folder labeled in David's handwriting, Estate. I hadn't opened it in years. I'd always told myself there was no rush. The kids were fine. The house was paid off. The investments were steady. I was healthy. I had time. And then I remembered something David said the year before he died, when we were sitting on the back porch watching the sun drop behind the maple tree. If I go first, he'd said, promise me you'll live. Don't turn into the caretaker of a museum. I'd laughed then, because the idea of David not being there felt impossible. Now I slid the folder out and opened it. Inside were documents I recognized: our will, the trust paperwork, insurance policies, the list of accounts. But there was also something new, an envelope sealed with tape, my name written on it in David's careful block letters. Ruth. Open when you're ready. My hands trembled. I looked at the dogs like they could tell me whether opening it would hurt or heal. Daisy whined softly, so I opened it. Inside was a letter. It wasn't long. David never wasted words. Ruth, it began, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably trying to hold everything together because that's what you do. I swallowed hard. He wrote about the house, about the investments, about the kids. He wrote, they will love you, but they will also take what you offer and call it normal. Don't let my death make you smaller. The money isn't a trophy for them. It's a tool for you. Then he wrote the sentence that made my breath stop. I set aside a travel account. It's in your name only. Use it. I want you to see the world without me, even if it breaks your heart. Especially if it breaks your heart. I stared at the page until the words blurred. A travel account. David had planned for a future where I might want joy again. And I had spent years living like joy was a betrayal. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, furious at myself for crying over paper. Then I kept reading. Ruth, he wrote, the children will be okay. They don't need you to preserve everything. They need you to stay yourself. Your life is not their waiting room. My phone buzzed again on the counter. Another message from Ellen, this time directly to me. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. We're doing Christmas at Mark's, but Nathan said he'll come by later with gifts. We thought you might prefer a quiet day with the dogs. Love you. I read it twice. We thought you might prefer. The words were soft, gentle. But the decision was already made. I didn't text back immediately. Instead, I did what David would have called being grown up. I called my attorney. Her name is Linda Weiss, and she's the kind of woman who wears pearl earrings and has no patience for nonsense. When she answered, I said, Linda, it's Ruth Kaplan. I need to update my estate plan. There was a pause, then a practical warmth in her voice. Okay, Ruth, tell me what's going on. And for the first time in years, I told someone the truth. Not that my children were cruel, but that I had been living in preparation for a future that wasn't mine. Linda asked one question. For whom? That question landed like a stone. For them, I admitted. For the kids. Linda's voice softened. And what do you want, Ruth? I looked around my kitchen. The platter. The silent phone. The dogs. The house full of memories and maintenance. I thought of David's letter. And I said quietly, I want to stop waiting. Linda didn't congratulate me. She didn't give me therapy. She just said, come in after the holiday. Bring your documents. We'll make a plan. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table and made my own plan too. Not revenge. Realignment. Because here's the thing people don't say out loud. When your children stop needing you, you either disappear or you return to yourself. And I wasn't ready to disappear. Not at 68. Not with a heart that still wanted things. Not with 2 dogs who believed I was the entire world. My best friends have been in my life longer than some of my children's marriages. Carol Rosen is divorced, sharp-tongued, and allergic to pity. She's the kind of woman who says, men are like parking spots, good ones are taken, and the rest are either too small or handicapped. Margot Feldman is still happily married to her college sweetheart, but she never makes her marriage a sermon. She's warm, steady, and the only person I know who can bake a pie and deliver a hard truth in the same breath. After David died, they were the ones who didn't vanish after the funeral food ran out. So Christmas morning I called them. Carol answered groggy and immediately said, if you're calling to tell me you're lonely, I will put pants on and come over. I'm not lonely, I said. There was a pause. Well, that's new. I told her about Ellen's text. About the assumption. About David's letter. Carol went quiet, then said, David Kaplan? Even dead, he's still smarter than half the living men I know. I want to travel, I told her. Good, Carol said instantly. We're going somewhere with good bread and zero obligations. Then I called Margot. When I told her what happened, she didn't explode. She didn't dramatize. She just said, that's not evil, but it's not okay. And then she said the thing I needed most. Guilt is not the same as wrongdoing. I texted Ellen back, Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I'm having a peaceful morning. Tell everyone I love them. I've made plans for myself today. Don't worry about me. Within a minute she replied, plans? With who? The question annoyed me more than it should have. As if I needed an approved chaperone to exist. I didn't answer. At 11:30 a.m. Mark called. Mom? Merry Christmas, he said, voice bright. Merry Christmas, I said. He didn't waste time. Listen, not today obviously, but we should talk about the house soon. My stomach tightened, not with shock anymore but with recognition. What about the house? I asked. Mark sighed like I was slow. It's a lot of upkeep, taxes, repairs. It might make sense to sell in the next year or two. Downsize, free up money, and do what with it? I asked. Mark laughed lightly. Mom, it's your money. But you could help the grandkids. You could help us. You could invest it. It's just sitting there. As if my home was a jar of cash under the mattress. It's not sitting there, I said quietly. I live here. A pause. Then Mark said carefully, of course you do. But you don't need all that space. I looked at Benny on his bed and Daisy gnawing a toy like it was her job. I'll think about it, I said. Mark sounded relieved. That's all I'm asking. Then, like an afterthought, he added, just, don't do anything rash, Mom. We're family. It sounded like a warning. Not about my loneliness. About my assets. We are family, I said. Merry Christmas, Mark. That night, Nathan came by with gifts. He looked tired, holding a bag of presents and a grocery store bouquet that didn't match any vase in my house. Hey, Mom, he said, stepping into my foyer like he wasn't sure he still belonged there. Hi, honey, I said, hugging him. He smelled like aftershave and office stress. We sat in the living room with the tree lights blinking softly. Nathan hesitated, then said, Ellen said you didn't want to come. I'm adjusting, I said. He studied me. Mom, Mark's been talking about the house a lot. Has he? I said. Nathan's jaw tightened. Ellen made a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet, I repeated. He handed me his phone. It was neat. Organized. Numbers and rows. A section labeled Projected Inheritance Distribution. My children's names were listed with percentages like they were stocks. My stomach went cold. Nathan looked ashamed. I didn't respond. It felt weird. It is weird, I said softly. It's worse than weird. I handed him back the phone carefully. Mom, he said, Ellen's not trying to be cruel. She just likes organizing. Organizing is planning dinner reservations, I said. Not dividing your mother into percentages. Nathan swallowed. Are you going to say something? No, I said. Not yet. When Nathan left, I stood in my kitchen and stared at the grown-up drawer again. I didn't feel rage. I felt clear. At 10 p.m., Rebecca called. She didn't start with Christmas. She started with need. Mama, I'm kind of in a pinch, she said, voice too bright. Could you help me out? Just until next month? I asked how much. 2,000, she blurted. You have it, right? And I'll pay you back, I swear. I could have said yes. I'd said yes before. So many times my yes had become expected. But tonight, David's letter sat on my table like a witness. I'm not going to do that, I said. Silence. Rebecca's voice sharpened. What? Mama, why? Because I'm making changes, I said. Rebecca laughed, incredulous. Changes? Like what? I'm not sure yet, I said. But I'm not going to keep being the backup plan. Her tone turned ugly. So because I didn't come to Christmas, you're punishing me. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm choosing myself. Rebecca scoffed. You're fine. You have your dogs. You have your dogs. As if my companionship was an excuse for their absence. Good night, Rebecca, I said. Mama. I hung up. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of doing something unfamiliar, ending the conversation instead of saving it. In the quiet week between Christmas and New Year's, I met with my attorney, Linda Weiss, and my accountant. Linda didn't call my children villains. She called the situation what it was, a family that had grown comfortable letting me disappear while still counting on what I owned. We updated everything in clean, legal language. I set up modest trusts for my grandchildren so their futures were protected regardless of anyone's motives. I reduced some portions of the estate not to punish, but to reflect reality and to stop financing entitlement. And I formalized what David wanted for me. A life fund, including the travel account he'd quietly created in my name. My accountant confirmed what I already suspected. I could liquidate a moderate portion of my investments, downsize, and still be secure. I'd been living like scarcity was virtue. It wasn't. It was fear dressed up as responsibility. When I left those meetings, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt awake. In early January, I hired a realtor, Tanya Goldstein, and told her the truth. I wasn't running away. I was choosing. We toured smaller homes in a nearby town, walkable, a little more aspirational, close to my friends. The first time I stepped into the right one, I felt it in my chest. Light, quiet, possibility. A yard for Benny and Daisy. A home that fit my life now, not my past. Word traveled fast. Mark called as soon as he heard. Ellen followed with questions disguised as concern. Their attention returned the moment the house did. That alone told me I was doing the right thing. By late January, I had my new place under contract. In February, Tanya listed my house. The sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I stood by the window watching her hammer it into the frozen ground and felt a surprising wave of grief. Not because I was changing my mind. Because I was finally admitting how much I'd been clinging to. The house sold quickly. Of course it did. It was in a good area. It had good bones. It had the kind of warmth people pay for. Within a week we had multiple offers. That's when the calls intensified. Mark called first. What did it go for, he asked, not bothering with hello. Mark, I said, I'm not discussing numbers. He laughed like I'd told a joke. Mom, come on. I'm just curious. I'm not discussing it, I repeated. Then Ellen called, asking if I was handling the stress. Julia called and actually asked how I was feeling. Nathan texted, proud of you. Rebecca didn't call. She showed up. On a Sunday afternoon, she knocked on my door like she was mad at it. When I opened it, she stood there with her hair piled on her head and a thin jacket in cold weather. Mama, she said, eyes flashing. So it's true. You're selling the house. Yes, I said. It's true. She stepped inside without waiting for permission, looking around like she was memorizing what she might lose. This is insane, she said. This is our childhood. It was, I said. So what, you're going to move into some little condo and spend all the money, she snapped. I heard the fear underneath. I'm moving into a smaller home in a town I like, I said. And yes, I'm going to spend my money. Rebecca stared at me like I'd spoken another language. But, why? She asked, softer now. Because I'm tired of living like my life is over, I said. Rebecca scoffed. Your life isn't over. Then why are you all treating me like it is? I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. Then she said the real thing. So you're taking away our inheritance. Not so you're leaving us. Not so you're unhappy. Inheritance. I'm not taking away love, I said. I'm adjusting structure. I still love you. I always will. But I'm not going to keep living small so you can live large later. Rebecca's eyes filled with angry tears. We're family. Yes, I said. And because we are, I'm going to stop disappearing. Rebecca left without hugging me. I sat down afterward with my legs trembling, and Benny put his head on my lap like he was anchoring me. In March, I got my next no-way moment. It arrived in my email inbox by accident. A message from Mark popped up with a subject line, Kaplan Property Options. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. Then I saw the sender's name, a man I didn't recognize, from a real estate firm. The email began, Mark, per our conversation, attached are suggested approaches for facilitating the transfer of the Kaplan property proceeds into a family investment vehicle. My stomach dropped. Attached were proposals, projections, and a draft entity, Kaplan Family Holdings, LLC. And under executive control, Mark's name was listed as managing member. Ellen was listed as secondary. They were planning to direct my house proceeds into something controlled by them. Without asking me. Not because they were starving. Because control is addictive to people who worship money. I printed the email and put it in the folder. Not to scream about it. To confirm what my instincts already knew. I called Linda. Linda, I said, Mark is making plans with my money. Linda's voice went hard. Does he have access to any of your accounts? No, good, she said. Then he's fantasizing. And we're going to keep it that way. She had me lock down every account, update passwords, confirm beneficiaries, and document that no one had authority to make financial decisions for me. Then she said something that made my chest tighten. When your children realize they're not in control, she said, they may call you selfish. Selfish. A word women my age have been trained to fear like fire. I swallowed. I don't want to be selfish. Linda said, gently, selfish is using people and calling it love. You're doing the opposite. You're reclaiming what's yours. By April, I had my closing date for the new house. In May, Ellen requested a family dinner, framed as a sweet send-off before my move. I agreed, but on my terms. I'll host one last dinner here, I said. Before I go. They arrived in pieces like always. Ellen came first with her husband and their baby carrying a casserole dish like a peace offering. Mark arrived next, empty-handed, eyes scanning the house like he was already calculating. Julia came with Tom and the kids, bringing flowers and genuine warmth. Nathan came alone, looking tired but present. Rebecca arrived last, still cooler with me but pretending nothing happened. We sat at the table where David used to sit. For a moment, grief pressed on my chest. Then I looked at my children, grown, capable, comfortable, and realized something that eased the grief. They were okay. They didn't need my house. They wanted it. There's a difference. Halfway through dinner, Ellen cleared her throat. Mom, she began, we've been thinking. Of course they had. With you moving, she continued, we just want to make sure everything is organized. Mark leaned forward. Yeah, like what are you doing with the proceeds? Are you investing them? Are you keeping them liquid? We just want to make sure you're protected. My old trigger word. Then Mark added, casually, we even looked into setting up a family investment entity. It would keep the money working for you. He said it like it was a gift. I set my fork down gently. You looked into that, I said without discussing it with me. Mark blinked. Mom, it was just information. Ellen jumped in quickly. We're not trying to control anything. We're just trying to help. I felt the familiar urge to smooth it over, to make it comfortable. Instead, I told the truth. I've lived frugally for years, I said calmly. I've kept this house and investments intact because I thought being responsible meant preserving everything for you. Mark nodded eagerly, misreading me. Exactly. I continued, but I realized after Christmas that I've been living like my life is already over. The table went quiet. I'm selling this house because I want a home that fits my life now, I said. I'm moving closer to my friends. I'm setting up trusts for my grandchildren. And I'm going to travel. Rebecca scoffed. So you're just going to blow everything? I'm going to live, I said. There's a difference. Ellen's cheeks flushed. Mom, we thought you wanted a quiet Christmas. You assumed, I said gently. You planned a holiday without asking me, and you called it kindness. Mark's jaw tightened. So what, we're the bad guys now? No, I said. You're not villains. You're adults who got comfortable. And I let you. I took a slow breath. David left me a letter, I said. They froze. He told me not to become the caretaker of a museum, I continued. He told me to live. He even set aside a travel account for me. Julia's eyes filled with tears. Ellen whispered, Dad did that? Yes, I said. And I ignored it for years because I thought being a good mother meant putting myself last. Nathan looked at me with something like pride. Mark leaned back, calculating. Rebecca stared at her hands. I looked around the table. I love you, I said. I'm not removing you from my life. I'm not removing you from my will. But I am changing how things are structured. Ellen's voice trembled. You already changed it. I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I let the silence speak. Mark's voice went sharp. You're doing this because of one Christmas? No, I said. I'm doing this because of 5 years. Julia whispered, Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I know, I said. Ellen blinked back tears. Mom, please don't do this behind our backs. Then stop making plans behind mine, I said softly. Mark stared at me like he was choosing his next words carefully. Then he asked the question that proved everything. How much did you change it? He said. Not are you okay? Not did we hurt you? How much? I felt something settle inside me. There it was. The truth, finally spoken out loud. I looked at him and said calmly, enough. Mark's face hardened. This is unbelievable. Ellen reached for my hand. Mom, we can fix this. You can fix effort, I said. You can fix relationship. But you can't fix the fact that I've spent years living like I'm waiting to die. Rebecca's voice cracked. So what, we just lose? This isn't a competition, I said. It only feels like one because you've been treating my life like a prize. Nathan spoke then, quiet but firm. I think Mom's right, he said. Everyone turned to him. Nathan looked uncomfortable, but he kept going. We've been busy. We've been assuming. And we've been talking about the house like it's already ours. Mark snapped, Oh, come on. Nathan's voice rose. It's true. And it's gross. Ellen went still. Julia cried openly. In that moment I saw something important. They weren't all the same. They weren't all equally selfish. But they had all benefited from my silence. Dinner ended awkwardly. There were hugs, but they were careful. After they left, I stood alone in my kitchen with the sink full of dishes and the house full of echoes. Benny patted in and leaned against my leg. Daisy jumped onto the chair and curled up as if she'd taken over David's old spot. I laughed softly through tears. Well, I whispered, that was the last dinner I host out of obligation. The closing happened at the end of May. I signed papers until my hand cramped. When it was done, I stood on the front steps of my old house and looked at the maple tree one last time. I expected to feel only grief. Instead, I felt gratitude. This house had held my life. But it wasn't my identity. It was a chapter. And I was still writing. On moving day, Carol and Margot showed up early with coffee and boxes. Carol wore sunglasses and said, "If any of your children show up to supervise, I will bite them." Margot hugged me and said, "This is going to be good." The dogs were confused at first. Benny paced. Daisy barked at every unfamiliar sound. But when we arrived at the new house, something shifted. Light poured through the windows. The air smelled like fresh paint and possibility. The neighborhood was quiet but alive, people walking, waving, living. Carol opened the back door and let the dogs into the yard. Benny immediately found a patch of grass and rolled in it like it was holy. Daisy sprinted in circles, ecstatic. I stood in the doorway watching them and felt my chest fill with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. In June, I booked the trip. Not a reckless fantasy. A planned, beautiful trip with two women who knew how to laugh after loss. Carol insisted on Italy. Margot suggested adding a few days in France because she wanted to see lavender fields before the world ends. We laughed, but underneath the humor was truth. Time isn't infinite, and we were done pretending it was. When I told the kids I was traveling, their reactions revealed everything. Julia smiled genuinely. "Mom, that sounds amazing." Nathan said, "Good." Ellen asked, "Is it safe?" Rebecca said, "Must be nice." Mark said, "How long are you going for?" How long? As if my joy had a deadline. Over the months that followed, the family adjusted in uneven ways. Julia leaned in with genuine warmth. Nathan started calling instead of texting. Ellen tried awkwardly at first, asking questions that were about me, not logistics. Mark stayed guarded, and Rebecca swung between affection and resentment. But even they began to understand one new rule: I would not be managed. I didn't demand apologies. I demanded effort. And where effort showed up, I met it with love. In October, I took the trip. Italy with Carol and Margot, bread, laughter, streets I'd never walked before. I came home with photos, a lighter heart, and the steady knowledge that joy wasn't something I had to earn by suffering first. Then December came again. The first Christmas in my new home. Ellen called in early December and asked, carefully, "Mom, what do you want to do for Christmas?" The question was different this year. Not assumed. Not decided. Asked. I paused, letting the weight of it settle. "I want something simple," I said. Julia offered to host a brunch. Nathan offered to pick me up. Mark offered to bring dessert. Rebecca sent a thumbs up and, for once, actually showed up on time. On Christmas morning, I woke up and felt something I hadn't felt last year. Anticipation. Not obligation. I took Benny and Daisy for a walk through the neighborhood. People waved. Someone wished me Merry Christmas. I waved back. At noon, Nathan arrived at my door. He didn't come empty-handed. He brought a small wreath and hung it on my door without asking. "Looks right," he said, stepping back. "It does," I said. At Julia's house there was chaos, kids, noise, food, laughter. But this time I didn't feel like an extra. Julia's daughter ran up and hugged me. "Grandma Ruth, you came?" "I did," I said. Ellen handed me a mug of hot chocolate and asked, "Are you warm enough?" Mark actually looked me in the eyes and said, "Mom, you look good." Rebecca hugged me a little too long and whispered, "Mama, I'm glad you're here." I held her. Me too. Nothing dramatic happened. And that was the miracle. Not that my children suddenly became perfect, but that I stopped shrinking myself to keep the peace. Because here is the truth I want every woman listening to understand. You can love your family and still change the structure. You can love your children and still choose yourself. You can keep giving, but you don't have to keep disappearing. That missing chair last Christmas wasn't just a sign I'd been excluded. It was a sign I had been quietly letting myself be folded away. This year, I wasn't folded away. This year, I showed up as myself. Not the family's caretaker. Not the family's asset manager. Just Ruth. A woman with 2 dogs, a quieter home, a passport with stamps, and a heart that finally remembered it was still allowed to want things. And if the reduced portions still burn for some of them, that's okay. Because the point was never to punish them. The point was to stop punishing myself. My name is Ruth Kaplan, and this was The Last Straw. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.